Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times. Welcome to my channel, welcome to a little bit of Age of Wonders Planetfall. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the Vanguard Celestian combo. Now, this combo is kind of both good and kind of bad here. I think that Void Tech, strictly speaking, is a little bit stronger, despite the fact that Vanguard meshes a little bit better with Celestian. And the reason I think ultimately that that's the case is that Vanguard, that Void Tech doesn't really mesh together, but it's because Void Tech is a little bit stronger. On the other hand, there's some really potent late game stuff that you can do with Vanguard Celestian that kind of has more to do with Celestian than it does to Vanguard, but there's also some sort of weird stuff going on, I think, that we'll get into as far as the units go. So first of all, let's take a look at the operations here. We're looking at a really weak set of operations here, I think even worse than Cynumbra, and that means you're again going to be leaning very heavily on those Vanguard ones. Now, Vanguard, you're going to want to, of course, go for like the Frontier Survival stuff there, Colony Militia. Those are just really strong staples that they get access to. But Hearts and Minds, I think, is actually really important in this one as well, just because you get access to that extra influence, and influence is really important for these guys. In terms of their faction or their secret tech-based doctrines here, you get Karmic Amplification. This gives you more quests, which does let you get more resources a little bit more quickly, but you have to do those annoying quests a lot more often, which I don't really like having to do all the time. And I think that ultimately speaking, it's not a strong economic bonus there. It's not a very reliable economic bonus. What it does do that's quite nice and is a bit unique is it lets you befriend NPC factions and dwellings a lot faster. So it is quite strong in that capacity, but even then, that's not really amazing. Over here, we've got access to Celestial Judgment. This gives us access to 10% extra damage against anyone that isn't Celestian themselves. This is a fairly good buff. I do think that it's okay. There are stronger ones out there, like the Cynumbra one, I think, is technically stronger. There's the Void Tech one, I think, actually not Void Tech. There's another one, but I think it's also stronger, but this one's kind of, Heritor's the other one that's stronger. This one's kind of okay. It's pretty reliable. You're going to be able to apply it almost all the time with every unit. Making your units enlightened is not difficult at all, so it's kind of an okay one, but it's not amazing either. You're generally speaking going to want to apply Celestial Judgment just to get that little tiny extra hit of damage that you can from your units there. Over here we get Neo-Evangelicals. This one's completely useless here, the entire tech. I've done it in other games, but not this one. First of all, you get access to the ability to, goddammit, get 6 happiness, basically. The 100 relations isn't enough to actually sway anything in your favor, in my opinion. I haven't had it work in my favor anyway. Plus 6 happiness is like 1/4, it's 1/3 to 1/4, basically, rounding of the Heritor version at the same tech tier of for happiness. So it's just so much weaker. It doesn't provide very much happiness at all. It's like 1 worker's worth. I think because of that, it's just really not capable of getting you anything that you really need. So by the time you get this one, it's just complete garbage. Next up, you get Disincentive Prayers. This one makes it so that you don't get attacked by Marauders, and again, this comes in really late game. If this was somewhere around tier 2, this would actually be kind of viable. There would be certain situations, especially if you've got the map settings so that the Marauders' frequency and intensity is set way up there, that they're a major problem. This could be useful in that situation, but in that situation, by the time you get to this tech level, you've probably been dealing with them long enough that you've got dedicated forces to smushing down Marauder camps before they can really cause a major problem, and you've probably gotten a lot more defensive forces set up for that purpose, and the AI is probably also busy dealing with Marauders, so they're not attacking as frequently, so you can devote those armies to squashing those Marauder stacks. I think that this is just completely useless. It's in the wrong place. If this was way earlier, useful situationally. At where it is, never useful at all. Next up, you get access to the Missionary Negotiators. If you've decided hardcore that you're not going to be building the Ascended Teachers, this can be pretty useful because you'll be able to spend that a little bit better on items from the dwellings, but you're probably not going to get too much benefit out of that. And in addition, by the time you get this, you're not bribing that many NPC stacks anymore. If this is again one that's in the wrong place. If this was an earlier tier tech, it would be potentially useful to just get rid of some of those dwelling stuff that you need to bribe. But unfortunately, it's just not in the sort of right place there. So I don't think that anything in Neo-Evangelicals is really that useful for you to take. at all, really. You're going to be relying heavily on the Vanguard doctrines, although the first two, while weak, are still worth taking situationally, and most games they're pretty okay. I think that they are probably the weakest ones that I would recommend taking, though. If I were to compare them to any other ones that I would take from any other secret tech, they're just the worst. Anyway, on to military. So you've got some interesting things going on here. For one, in reality, all I really think you need to get to is Shield of Remorse for the mod side of things there. You can go, of course, further. There are a couple neat pickups here, especially at the very, very end here. Shield of Reckoning is quite decent, but realistically, you can get a lot of value just by going up to Shield of Remorse and then working on researching other things here. The thing about these mods is that any single one of the mods for the Celestians gives you the Enlightened status, and you do want all of your units to be Enlightened. This gives you plus 20% damage against enemy units that have Soul Burn applied to them, and it gives you plus 200 morale, which increases your critical chance, and it gives you some resistance and leeway if people are using morale debuffs against you. The reason that this one in particular is so good is that it's one of the ways for non-Celestian units to reliably get Soul Burn on enemies, which gives you that plus 20% damage against them, meaning that this module is plus 10 hit points, plus 20% damage, the ability to cause enemies to suffer a morale penalty, which could potentially cause them to cause more fumbles. It's just a really all-around good mod for both defense and offense, I find. So it's pretty powerful for where it is located. I'd say it's one of their best mods, and it's certainly most cost efficient. After that, you can go for like Inner Fire here. I didn't bother in this case. Sway Ideology can be pretty okay to sort of get a little bit more influence early. I don't really like it that much there. Soulfire is actually pretty okay, but since everything is going to be taking, in my case, the Shield of Remorse, I don't really need to Soul Burn the enemy there, so this is really just causing 20% damage. It does mean your first turn alpha, though, is a lot stronger because all of your units will be able to hit them, and they will be Soul Burned, meaning that you'll deal at plus 20% damage even if you're firing first at them. So it's good under that situation there. And then there's Blessing of Starlight. Stagger resistance and 10% accuracy is actually quite strong, as well as being able to heal to 100% there. There are a lot of situations where this would actually be quite strong. I just didn't bother with it in this particular case. So generally speaking, I would go to Penance. If I wanted to, I would go Inner Fire. But I would potentially pick up Luminance, but then I'd start going into other technologies, whether it be the Firearms tree, whether it be the Vanguard tree, whatever it is, I can go into a bunch of different stuff. What I will definitely grab, though, is Rapid Maneuvers, not only because Deploy Valkyrie is becoming more and more my favorite operation, but because also it gets you access to the jetpack, which is going to be pretty important for you here. Now, it doesn't matter if you get the jetpack first or the Lightbringer first, but they really come alive once you get access to both of them. Even if you don't get both of them, though, right off the bat there, getting the Lightbringer and then chucking on the Shield of Remorse, which you should get before the Lightbringer, and throwing on the Interlocking Armor, which you can get pretty quickly, that combination makes these guys pretty viable just right there. They're pretty strong once you've done just that. Hopefully you're not going to be facing off against too complicated of stacks from the AI, but generally speaking, these guys will be able to sort of chew their way and claw their way through pretty tough stacks. I think that they're going to be quite strong consistently for you. But once you get access to the jetpack, of course, your combination is going to be probably something like Shield of Remorse, the Interlocking Armor, and the jetpack. Now, you could theoretically get stagger resistance from from Tenets of Tranquility. The problem with this one is that it doesn't provide much effect there. It gives you that stagger resistance, it gives you one shield, and it gives you Enlightened. So you're essentially paying for that Enlightened, but since the Lightbringers are already Enlightened, they don't really need that. So the Interlocking Armor giving you the extra 2 kinetic resistance there. Functionally, the difference in total is that the Interlocking Armor gives you an additional 2 resistance to kinetic, in addition to giving you the exact same effects otherwise as the Tenets of Tranquility. Depends on which you like better, armor or shields, of course, as well, but generally speaking, armor is better for melee units because they're going to be in melee, and if they're punching a melee unit to death, then that other melee unit ignores shields anyway. So Interlocking Armor, I would say, is definitely the stronger of the two. But once you've got that combination up and running, you're pretty much got your late game Lightbringers. There's no real mods, I think, that are going to improve on what they've got once you sort of have that combination there. Fairly powerful unit. I would say that they're definitely weaker than the Echo Walker. for what they are, but they're still pretty good. Their direct damage and stuff like that, durability, everything looks stronger, but the fact that the Echo Walker, you're fighting 2 units essentially, you kill off one of them, and there's still the other one that you still have to deal with, means that the Echo Walker, I think, is ultimately a little bit stronger. But the individual, like if you had one Echo Walker and you just couldn't phase Quantum Pulse or whatever, for whatever reason, if that was happening, this one's way, way better than just one Echo Walker. The problem is you never fight just one Echo Walker, you're always fighting at least 2. That means that these guys are substantially weaker in my opinion, but they're still fairly decent, and they've got a definite role in the sort of composition here. Because you can't just rely on using a whole bunch of spam of Lightbringers though, unlike with the Echo Walkers where you can rely pretty well on just spam of Echo Walkers plus something to deal with air units, these guys really need backup from other types of units, I find. In my particular case, I find the Trooper can be a solid backup for these guys quite reliably, so that's sort of what I go with, is Troopers, Lightbringers. The next unit that you can get access to is the Star Guide. This unit is good. There is a definite role for it. If I was playing as Devar, for example, what I would have is like the Trenchers, and I would have the Light Bringers, and what they would do is they would try to push through and grind through the enemy's front line, obliterate that, and then defeat whatever's in the back behind them. So their snipers, their artillery units, anything like that, their support units, Kiriko Transcendence, stuff like that, so that's harder to sort of get to. If I try to just push my way past the enemy there, I might take a ton of damage on my units and they might get killed, because the enemy's front line will still be intact, of course, and this is where these units come in. Blinding Light lets me sort of bypass the enemy front if they're too, if I just need to disable 1 or 2 units there, because it lets me sort of slip past a powerful melee unit that's blinded. He no longer gains melee overwatch, so I can easily slip past there. Or if I'm dealing with something like, say, really powerful range units that I'm concerned about flanking my Lightbringers as they go past, or just dealing too much damage to me as I go past them. Those are all concerns. Blinding Light helps me deal with that just a little bit. Cleansing Light lets me sort of bash through my enemy front line really effectively, and then heal my units up and remove all the stat effects so they can continue on to those support units and those snipers and all that other stuff, and then pummel them to death and hopefully have enough health and stuff like that to be able to do that. And Celestial Guidance lets me sort of then also augment my Trenchers to let them sort of get through a little bit faster. The problem is that's not how you use Celestians when you're playing as the Vanguard. When you're playing as Vanguard, you've got your sort of front line of Troopers who are laying down like walls of lead and stuff like that. They're pretty durable themselves there. They're not really super worried about people sort of rushing into melee against them. But if your opponent has things like Transcendent, or you've got they've got like snipers, or they've got whatever, what you can do with Vanguard is you can just immediately jetpack towards your opponent there, and then you can use the flame, or whatever the hell, the assault dash. The Assault Dash is unique for the Vanguard. The Assault Dash, unlike everyone else's variant of it, the Meteor Dash, I think is the standard one, grants you an additional 2 shields, meaning that your unit has got 5 essential defense stats against range units, basically, which means that if your opponent is trying to focus down these guys, it's going to be a little bit harder. That extra 2 shields is quite substantial, actually, especially if you're building these guys tanky, which you should be. You're going to be firing at units that are really hard to kill, a little bit harder than even it would be for other units. And in addition, it's not as you would do for other factions, where first turn with the Devar, for example, my Lightbringer would run up into melee with their frontline units and punch them once maybe, and then I would receive a bunch of fire onto my Lightbringers, and then I would run past them to get to the second line, or I would Meteor Dash onto them to get out of that situation so that I could do that, in which case, you know, I'd deal some damage to their backline, and then I'd get shot down because I probably am already low health. That's what would happen if I tried to bypass the front line with Devar, for example. With Vanguard, you sort of jetpack up to their front line, and then I assault dash into their second line, which means I'm taking 1 less turn of fire to get into their squishy back units. And that's kind of the difference here. And, you know, then they turn, use all their fire. They're doing a lot less damage than they would be if I was using other units, because those 2 shield points mean quite a decent amount there. And what's probably hopefully going to happen is that I'm capable of punching down their Transcendents, their snipers, their whatever, with the powerful Lightbringers that I've got there, and then wiping out a bunch of their other units because I've got the ability to still fire at them with my Troopers. Again, this doesn't happen this way with other factions there. So just because of that sort of playstyle difference, I don't think that there's really a place in this composition for the Star Guide. It's not as though it's a bad unit. There's definitely situations where I would consider using these. It's just I wouldn't bother using them with the Vanguard. Next up, we got access to the Ascended Teachers. And these guys are just so ridiculously powerful that even though they don't really synergize with anything, they're just that good on their own. They do also improve whatever the hell you're using. It doesn't matter what units you've got. These guys improve it. So let's take a look if I can find a stack that's got one. We've got 3, I think, on the map here. But anyway, let's take a look at the Ascended Teacher here. So they've got access to Radiant Blast, which is a pretty okay psionic attack there. And this is not really something that you can easily mod to increase with the Vanguard here. We can look currently here. None of these are like attack damage mods here. So basically, we're looking at just nothing but defensive mods. And that's kind of fine. You've got the ability to get the Celestial Enlightened bonus there, so you're still doing 20% extra damage from that one. And then we can activate Celestian Judgment to get an extra 10% there. So we can be looking at a 30% bonus to Radiant Blast. So that's the same as one really powerful offense mod. So that's kind of fine there. Compelling Presence, though, ability to mind control units. If they're soulburned, they've got a very high chance of being mind controlled by this. Certain game modes, this is even stronger because it gives you a colonist if that unit that you've mind controlled survives. Mind controlling an entire army is potentially viable with these guys in certain game types, in which case you'll be able to get a bunch of colonists in situations where it's impossible to build colonists. That makes this unit kind of really broken, although I haven't actually tested that. That might be disabled for those particular map types. Might be interesting to test that one. Celestial Wrath is an extremely powerful ability. It's a lot like S-Tech Judgment. The difference between this and S-Tech Judgment is that this one comes off the bat ready to use. S-Tech Judgment, you had to accumulate your 5 points of essence. This one, you just have to have a stack of 5 units in your group. And it doesn't actually have to be enlightened units. It says it has to be enlightened units in the battle there. The reason it doesn't actually matter is that this guy's got Path of Light here, which changes all friendly units in that stack into enlightened ones. So long as this guy's part of a full stack, it doesn't matter what they are. You gain access, well, if they're not mindless, you gain access to the ability to use Celestial Wrath at full value immediately, which is a humongous amount of damage. It's capable of just like splorching an entire sort of wave of enemy units, and if they're sort of clustered together. Again, this doesn't need any mods to be effective. Anything that does survive has soul burn on them, so you're going to be able to apply a lot more damage on those guys afterwards. This ultimately is just a ridiculously powerful area of effect nuke that can be used multiple times, so long as you've got enough time for cooldown, but you're not going to need to use it more than once. It's just that powerful there. Celestial Radiance here, Enlightened Healing, you get a huge amount of healing in an area effect there. You're able to also revive friendly units in a 1 hex radius area, so if a bunch of people have gotten aggressive and died, you can still use Celestial Radiance to bring them back. And in addition, so long as this guy survives the fight and you win it, you're able to get access to the Resurgence effect from Path of Light there, where all of those units that died come back to life again. So long as you're winning and keeping this guy alive, it doesn't matter how recklessly you use your units, because they'll still be able to come back to life there. So suicide jobs, not necessarily a huge deal for this sort of thing here. All these effects make this thing just ridiculously potent. It's just a very game-changing type of unit there. Nothing that you can apply to him from Vanguard is super effective here. You don't need to add jetpacks to this guy. The sequential kill system is not super useful for him. The only thing that could really be benefited from that is Compelling Presence, and that has a long cooldown, so you're not looking at a ton of benefits from that there. But you can get some good use out of the interlocking armor to make him immune to stagger there. Nanite injectors are liked by anything. And you can throw the Shield of Remorse on this guy, so this would be a pretty good build. This is the build that I think is quite nice there. We can actually take a look. I think I've actually got one built in that way here, so we can take a look here. Yeah, Nanite Injector, Shield of Remorse, Interlocking Armor, and there's realistically nothing I would change that out for, even if we went into the later game. This is just a really solid combination for this type of unit there. Makes it so that his armor is 2, his shields is 6. If he wasn't a novice, he would have 80 hit points, so the base hit point value would be 80 essentially with those items. Very, very powerful sort of unit there. So that one I don't think really needs much from your Vanguard stuff there, but you just sort of throw whatever you can that's going to be effective onto him. And this is going to apply for virtually any faction. There's going to be some mods that you just chuck onto that guy to make him even a little bit better than he already is. But realistically speaking, he's already so kick-ass that you're just going to want to have him hanging around and surviving a little bit more effectively. In terms of other units that you could be using as Vanguard, realistically anything that's not mindless and is not a summoner of units there, so not engineers and not the carrier, can make pretty good use of things like Shield of Remorse, or they can make good use of the Tenets of Healing, or they can make use of the Tenets of Pacifism even, or the Shield of Reckoning, depending on sort of the direction you're planning on going and how you think that you want this to all work out there. Take, for example, the Walker. You could give those Walkers access to the Shield of Reckoning. This would mean that they would have the Enlightened status effect there, and you wouldn't have to go for other stuff there, and then I can focus on kinetic weapon upgrades there. By contrast, if I wanted to go for something like, say, the reactive armor, instead of that, I would have to pick something else. And I could go with Shield of Reckoning and reactive armor if I wanted to, but it would force me to pick at least one of these mods to make sure that my unit's enlightened, which I think is important for this. The tank, similar sort of story there. If you wanted to go for something like tanks, you can just throw on something like the Tenets of Healing, or you can throw on the Shield of Remorse, or really any of these, and it's going to make your tank a little bit better there. It's going to give it that Enlightened bonus as well, which is always great value, and then throw on some like laser mods or reactive armor or anything like that. So all of these things, you just want to throw any one of them because they have that extra value of giving your unit that Enlightened bonus, which is quite powerful, as well as having strong, decent bonuses to begin with. So I think that their stuff is not necessarily things that... their bonuses are so generically good without being like ridiculously powerful. They're just all really sort of a strong thing to have access to for virtually any unit that can apply them, that you're going to want to just sort of dip into this and see what you can pull out and get whatever you want out of there. You're not going to make any sort of units from the Vanguard side of things with just Celestian techs applied to them, mods to them. There's no offense to this stuff, and they don't really stack that effectively. For example, if I took Tenets of Healing and the Shield of Remorse there, that combination, you're paying every time you take one of these to have that effect of being enlightened. Part of the cost of these is that. They're super, super well discounted if you only consider taking one of them. But once you've taken two of them, I feel like they dramatically degrade in terms of how cost effective they are. So this is why I would, generally speaking, recommend only taking one of them. And for units like the Lightbringer and even the Teacher, there's instances where I've definitely considered not taking the Shield of Remorse. I definitely still think that taking the Lightbringer, just taking the nanite injectors, plate armor, or interlocking armor, and the jetpack, those three things, throw that on there, you're going to have a fantastic unit. I mean, these guys do theoretically have the ability to apply soul burn. It's not necessarily the most reliable to just use your assault dash and only use your assault dash to get soul burn for these guys, but if you can get that, that's fantastic. You're going to be able to then pummel that unit down very effectively without having to apply any of the other sort of mods that just aren't necessarily that cost effective. Once you factor in the fact that you're sort of paying for that extra 200 morale that you're not getting, as well as that enlightened 20% damage bonus that you're not getting because you've already got it. You've already paid for it, essentially. So I think that that's sort of how you approach these guys. I think that this combination is one that has a lot of really interesting nuance to it without being as overbearingly powerful as something like Void Tech is. And again, it's more interesting in how the units actually mesh together and interplay with Celestian, and I think that it's going to be the case that Celestian has interesting interactions with every faction, whereas other ones like Void Tech really resist the idea of integrating together with a faction there. I think that this one really comes together nicely with whatever it's going to be attached to here, even though I think it is a little bit on the weaker side without being as overwhelmingly powerful in certain situations where it can be applied. So anyway, I think that is pretty much everything we've got to talk about here. So, oh yeah, I guess I can talk about the composition of these stacks here. So basically, this one's got a little bit too much Trooper here. I would like to remove one of them and replace it with a Lightbringer. But other than that, when you're on the walk and you're on the march and you're trying to get stuff done, you don't always have the ability to produce perfect stacks there realistically. You just make what you can get. As units die, you replace them with what you can get, and that's sort of how things go. But the way that this sort of works here is that the troopers here, they're quite durable, they're quite tough for what they are. These ones weren't produced necessarily in the best factory, so they don't have the armor bonuses, but they're pretty tough still. They've got a decent amount of hit points, they've got good accuracy, they've got good defensive capabilities for what they are. And what they can do is they can sort of chip away at the enemy there, and if the enemy's turning around, you can get a lot of damage out of these guys from a good range. It really forces the enemy to move their troops up towards us, which is a big thing that I like having happen. We can sort of chip away at the enemy from long distance, from 8 away, because they don't want to commit. They take a bunch of damage, not very much damage, but they take enough damage. They blow some support abilities, they move their units forward to try and get at us. They deal a little bit of damage, and once they're up closer, we retaliate with a lot of damage. And this guy dives into whatever sort of units are in their backline, their support units, stuff like that, makes it so they can't use those abilities there. In this case, we're up in a war against the Kirko, so I would definitely use this guy to dive the Transcendent, try and stagger those guys and kill them off first. Meanwhile, this guy's just pulling support there. He's going to look for good opportunities to use Celestial Wrath. He's going to look for good opportunities to use Compelling Presence, and he's going to be able to just Radiant Blast or Celestial Radiance whenever he needs to. It's a very, very powerful combination of units there. You can use this guy really, really aggressively because you know that you can bring him back using the Ascended Teacher. Even if he doesn't get there in the middle of the fight, he can just get them back at the end through Resurgence. And yeah, it's just a really all-around quite good combination there. We can take a look at some of our other stacks, but I've actually managed to keep these guys pretty consistent. This one's a little bit closer to what we want, although we want an Ascended Teacher down here. It's hard to afford them, but this is pretty good if you don't have access to that. Having just a couple of Lightbringers, you don't need a ton of them. But they pair really, really nicely with this basic sort of firing line sort of thing there. The firing line is capable of just putting out consistent, reliable damage without having to expose themselves to too much danger. They provide all the anti-air need necessary, and the other guys just provide the ability to get rid of specialist units and stuff like that. Same sort of story over here. Stuff is going on in that sort of direction there. We've got another army somewhere around here. Can't remember where this fellow is, but we've got a lot of armies basically. So yeah, that is going to be our look at the Vanguard Celestian combination. I think that it's a pretty fun combination actually. It's not necessarily super strong. I think that's more a factor of Celestian just not being ridiculously overpowered, but it's definitely interesting. It's a lot of fun to play. It's got some interesting things going for it. It's got some good synergy going for it, and all around I think that you should give this one a try. So anyway, hope you found this episode enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.